Hey everybody, welcome back to the V Cipher effort. It is August 26th, 2020. We're closing out the summer here pretty soon. Labor Day is a couple weeks. And this may be the last video that I do that's supplemental to the whole summer series that I did that I actually didn't intend to do. If everybody remembers, this was supposed to be the last video of the V-Steganography series. These are the most recent videos I've done on the channel. But turns out, just for sake of this one, to give yourself a primer, if you're coming to the video for the first time, start here with the video prior to it. It'll give you a little bit of an idea of who the Fox faction that we tie to the Jesuits are and how it relates to the V phenomena and the cipher that we found relating back to the Q side of things. You'll see how that all connects if you're not familiar already, and then just watch all the way through the video I did a couple weeks ago, because we're even going to expand on the conspiracy with history relating to the samurai, the Asian flow of population as it relates to white Aryans, the Ainu, which were the samurai, or the Anu, like all these white-skinned people that seem to be hidden in the annals of history as it relates to the Slavs, the people of the Russian region of Tartary. So that's all incredibly important, just as kind of an aside. And then also, if you haven't done so, the band video that was up on YouTube before a couple months ago, that I put actually over on my Patreon page here, is going to have some story beats that play out through it as we go through the material today too. So you can come over to my Patreon page. This is the one that I did on Satoshi Nakamoto, Steve Jobs, tying it to the mind control spell of Oz and Ozzy Osbourne. And then most recently on my alchemical series, 1, 2, 3, I'll be doing part 4 of the alchemy series, which also touches on a key component that expands on that whole Bitcoin reset and Wizard of Oz riddle. But you can subscribe for just $3 a month right now over on that page. If you just want to support the effort right now and become a part of my Theta.tv community, I will be starting to stream over on Theta.tv and tell everybody what the benefits are, in fact, over on the Patreon side of things later today. And then I'll do a separate video that's just on YouTube explaining what Theta is, so everybody can figure out if they want to participate on a new streaming service. But for now, I am going to start with where we kind of have left off already in some recent videos with the economic reset side of things. The cover of The Economist magazine from 1988 is of no secret to anybody that has come to this channel by this point, I don't think. The themes that are going to play out, at least in this decode today, are relating to the aforementioned Bitcoin economic reset that we find ourselves in right now, in the midst of. The current war with China, which is the current war, like the electrical current, as we've talked about Tesla and the Tesla technology paradigm being released, to make way for space technologies. And necessarily, for us to find out about those, what is the mystery that's being revealed in the midst of what is a global pandemic that is hidden in plain sight by the V-Steganography that we get into. So as kind of a refresher, again, this is the 10-cent piece of in year 0, 2020, year 0, how we're decoding this key central component to the Phoenix's burning of the old system down here, the fiat money system being burned for a new system. The fleur-de-lis on top has always been suspect to me because of the French symbolism that it conveys, and I've always speculated on whether or not the Bonaparte family and Napoleon is part of this whole 300-year-long saga of hiding history. But this is kind of where we're starting. One of the suppositional viewpoints that we have around this economic reset today, because there have been some things in the last couple of weeks that have continued to happen around the organization in China, Tencent. We talked a little bit about this last time, where the 10-cent piece and 10 cent are clearly part of this riddle playing out. Q being central to this. QQ.com and Tencent QQ, an instant messenger and web portal service that Tencent also owns. It's one of the largest holding companies in the world. They also own the WeChat properties and TikTok properties. Okay? So, establishing that, some interesting things have happened over the last couple of weeks since we've talked last relating to those holdings. Trump signed an executive order against Tencent-owned companies, which included TikTok and WeChat. But it did not, they said, affect their video game holdings. We're going to find out how the video game holding component also has something to do with this story. But I will note, I'm not done decoding this story yet. I will show you the V steganography I've already found and what it portends to lead to. But this is still playing out as a broader stroke to the whole economic reset, as far as I can tell. And so how I gauge the fallout from this is not one that I'm making too many conclusions or speculations on right now. I'm just pointing to the fact that this is happening. So if anybody has anything else to add on this of their own speculations, I'd be happy to hear them, because throughout the course of September, I'm going to be adding more interaction with you guys anyway, because as you'll find here in just a couple minutes, one of my patrons in specific keeps giving me some really good stuff as it relates to the research that is very complimentary. So Fortnite is also an interesting component to this company, Tencent. And Fortnite is owned by Epic Games, which this company, Tencent, has a percentage holding in. And they also end up having a percentage holding in Riot Games. Riot Games, interesting name for the things that are going on right now. I don't know if that's connected, right, to the political unrest in the country, but it is an interesting title nonetheless. And they also have a stake in Activision, Blizzard, and Ubisoft. So these guys have a huge gaming company holding. And one of the main money makers is Fortnite, because of how popular it is on the App Store. Okay, and so what they're saying is that they're not being affected by Trump's executive order against TikTok and WeChat. And again, TikTok and WeChat were banned by the executive order because of security provisions that were built into the app that allowed basically some backdoor spying to occur. So since these are Chinese run and operated, and the United States is engaged in a current Cold War with China, there's no mistaking that these moves are just being made as part of this overall war. But a week after this, something happened in the App Store for Apple that got me really turned on to this story. And the dots just keep connecting with the V-steganography components and how we're breaking apart this economic reset tapestry. So there was, at the same time, issue with Fortnite then bypassing Apple to take away its App Store revenues as it relates to the incremental in-app purchases. So Fortnite filed a lawsuit against Apple because Apple blocked Epic's Fortnite from the App Store. So to refresh, we have TikTok and WeChat being banned from the App Store, two Tencent-owned companies, or Tencent-owned apps, and I guess they are truly companies that are part of this holding company's assets. But it did not affect their video game holdings, at least yet, until a week later when Fortnite was banned from the App Store because of this circumvention mechanism where they were collecting all of their own revenue without paying royalties to Apple. As soon as my computer refreshes, it froze up there. Okay, so scrolling down the page here a little bit, we're gonna get into why this matters. Like I said, just as soon as my my computer is unfrozen. There we go. So why this made it even more interesting, especially in this article on Zero Hedge, was that the phrase contrasting Apple's recent behavior to its infamous 1984 ad accusing IBM of anti-competitive practices. This quote gets rendered. Fast forward to 2020, and Apple has become what it once rallied against, the behemoth seeking to control markets, block competition, and stifle innovation. So this is part of the lawsuit that's filed. This is language that's in the lawsuit that's provided by Fortnite, accusing Apple of not taking the position of that 1984 commercial where the woman throws the hammer into the big Orwellian screen. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this whole ad and my decode of it, it's actually all in the Ozzy Osbourne video, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Ozzy Osbourne video that I did that got banned on YouTube. So you can go watch that on Patreon. But what's even more interesting is that in this Apple Store war that's being deemed, Epic Games announced as part of this, what the defense of the lawsuit on Epic Games' part is that they announced their Fortnite Mega Drop promotion, which was a permanent discount on V-Bucks. And the reason of the permanent discount is because if they're not having to pay royalties to Apple anymore, they can discount that price that they charge in the App Store and gain all that margin themselves. So any discount permanently is going to look good for the players of the game. Should incite more buying of in-game currency. Just so happens that the permanent discount on the in-game currency is on V-Bucks. And I actually did not know this. I did not know that Fortnite's in-game currency was called V-Bucks. I probably would have covered it a lot earlier if I would have known this. But other cash purchases in the game were discounted 20%. Direct payment options, blah, blah. So the main story beats are this. Apple is now banning Fortnite. So effectively in the United States, you have WeChat, TickTok, and Fortnite all banned, all part of the Tencent corporation under this Q guise. And it really makes you consider like whose side is who on. I'm no fan of Tim Cook himself. He is not somebody like Steve Jobs that I think is altogether with it in terms of the direction of humanity. I think Steve Jobs is, depending on whether you believe if he is truly dead or not. But it's altogether too interesting that this is all lining up with the V-Cipher, guys. So this is kind of a developing story. I wanted to point everybody toward this. The V-Bucks, the Tencent, the economic reset. This is also a digital currency, so it's getting people more comfortable with digital currency, but also it could be something, if I'm thinking about this correctly, that broadcasts to people that there's going to be legal action taken if you do anything to go against the official regulated FedCoin digital currency. And we're going to talk about that a lot more when we get to my Patreon video later. I'm going to do part 1 here on YouTube, part 2 on Patreon like I always do. And in part 2, we're going to get deeper into the connection of Satoshi Nakamoto, Apple, Steve Jobs, and Bitcoin. They both share the same birthday, as a for instance, right? So more to come on that in the Patreon side of things after we get through this. But one piece to close that out, this whole tapestry out with a, let's think about this, is a CNBC article that actually just dropped a couple of days ago. And this is the article I mentioned that was sent to me by one of my patrons, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to all the patrons, in fact, that are supporting the work. But Chris in particular has been giving me some really good flags, dog ears, whatever you want to say, of topics that are coming across his desk. And since I've been so busy, I don't even have a chance to look at some of this stuff. But this directly relates to that banned video that we keep referencing here. Because in that video, it's all about the Wizard of Oz, all about the spells being cast for the marketing memes, all about how Steve Jobs had the upper hand on Bill Gates the whole time in their career. And I show the interplay of interviews in that video and such. And this interview that Bill Gates just did on a podcast called The Armchair Expert was staggering in what it revealed about what we're onto in that video. So with all of this said, at some point in the interview, when talking about Steve Jobs, Bill Gates renders some thoughts. He says, quote, "He was such a wizard at over-motivating people. I was a minor wizard, so I couldn't fall under his spells. But I could see him casting the spells. And then I would look at people and see them mesmerized," Gates says in the interview. "I was so jealous. Jobs was a genius. He was especially amazed." So this is an interesting thing to render. If he's literally saying in plain sight, I was a minor wizard. So it's showing Bill Gates is also a wizard. He's not as good of a wizard as Steve Jobs was, and that the type of mesmerism that was in play with the words, the spelling of words, the casting of words into the material realm by speaking, by verbal incantation, right? That's all speech is casting spells. And if you weave it appropriately, you can get this mesmerized effect of, just like Franz Mesmer, the 1700s French dude. Also, particularly, if you go back to the fleur-de-lis symbolism, of course, on the Economist magazine cover, there's the French component there too. Mesmerism is a practice which developed in France. But furthering on the article, Gate also says he wishes he could be as magical as Gates because he has causes that are in some way more impactful, and he needs to make sure they don't get ignored. So because the way I read this is because everybody's ignoring the vaccine, calling it, they're seeing through Bill Gates' spells. They're seeing through it. They're weak. They're fizzling. His spells are fizzling. Steve Jobs, being this expert wizard, would have never ever fizzled this spell, but Steve Jobs seems to be a more benevolent character than Bill Gates does, obviously, as well. He said Jobs' ability to mesmerize audiences was so he could generate the support for his. So he wishes that he could have Jobs' ability to mesmerize audiences so he could generate even more support for the causes he champions. Again, showing, I think, that this whole Agenda 201 or Agenda 21, Event 201, bioweapon conspiracy to get vaccines is something that is failing. And I think Bill Gates, for whatever reason, I don't know why the admissions are coming out in a podcast like this, if maybe only to dispel what people's suppositions about him are and maybe humanize himself is all I can think is to what he's saying. But thank you again, Chris. This was a huge hit. We're going to reference it again later as it relates to the topics of the currency reset and Bitcoin stuff. But again, that stuff seems to get us banned on the YouTube side when we speculate about it this particular way, that is. And so we're going to save that for the Patreon video. So moving on, this current war in China, of course, is playing itself out in any number of other ways, too. We're going to get into some of that, and not only this currency Cold War that's happening between the U.S. and China. We're going to discuss this, but before we get off the topic of vaccines, I wanted everybody to take a look at, oh yes, some awesome news out of the authoritative realm of biology or virology. Biotechnology. Here, there's the phraseology in nanotechnology. So the subheading here actually did my job for me. Professor Giuseppe Trito, an internationally known expert in biotechnology and nanotechnology, says that the China virus definitely wasn't a freak of nature that happened to cross the species barriers from bat to man. So we've speculated all along on all this Event 201 stuff since the winter time about what this COVID-19 thing is or isn't. And we've absolutely, I think, astutely landed on the fact that it is a bioweapon developed in China, but that it actually started here in the U.S. The path being created in Fort Detrick, Dr. Fauci somehow colluding with Charles Lieber at Harvard, by which Charles Lieber sends information through some Chinese nationals that live in Canada, through some labs up there, eventually getting the information to Wuhan. Wuhan then uses it to mutate the virus. This whole bat component comes into it to create a vaccine with vitamin C, ascorbic acid. All of these things seem to be exactly spot on based on the book that Giuseppe Trito has written, and I plan to absolutely get. I've read some synopses about this book. I cannot wait to buy it. And I'll link this article in the description so you guys can follow this story for when this thing comes out. But it is validation to what the strands were on. In some way, it's validating the V-steganography conclusions that we're drawing along the way. A lot of the stuff today is actually going to lead us there. And you'll see, especially by the end of this video, when we're getting into the Anatoly Fomenko stuff as it relates to the history items. Stay tuned for, I don't know how long, the next hour and a half until the end of the video for that. But I wanted to point to that because as it relates to the vaccine stuff, some more news keeps piling out. Of course, the COVID-19 agenda is nowhere close to being concluded. But Virginia, one of the V states in the United States, is the first state to require mandatory vaccinations for COVID-19. How this plays out, time will tell. I'm just pointing to the fact that as of a couple days ago, the mandatory vaccines for all residents are a thing. Maybe it's just coincidental that that one of the V states was the first one. If there's a pattern, let's say Vermont is the next one that gets tagged with mandatory vaccines, that would be too much of a coincidence, and I think we would naturally have to conclude that the V steganography, at least for this particular legislation, is also in play. So keep an eye on this story. But the main story that I wanted to land on relating to the vaccines, and then getting back to the China stuff, relates to the Sputnik V vaccine in Russia. We've been talking a lot about Russia because in this video, of course, I was talking about Vladimir Putin and his calling out of the rest of the world to write history for the sake of truth. And in this video, Coronavirus Slavery of the Cheetah, I'm talking about how history is locked in place as it relates to the truths of the matter that go back even 500 years. That's why the Anatoly Fomenko stuff matters so much. And then we are going to tie it up today, again, with some more of this Chinese samurai saga. But Russia's central to the story somehow, and clearly Sputnik V is what they named the vaccine. Sputnik V maybe is what I actually it's probably what they're calling it. I haven't heard it verbally spoken. I've only read the terminology, so I don't know if that's the case or not. But I have a speculation on this. They're waging major information warfare against Russian vaccine because they're talking about discrediting this vaccine, right? The pharmaceutical industry in the United States clearly doesn't have a true vaccine program in place. And the race to do this, the race to create a vaccine, one might say, is being mocked by Russia. If one were to look into what is being said between them, because clearly V steganography is apparent. I hold out possibility, and my current thinking on this is that Russia might be fucking with us, or the US. They just might be messing with the whole meme around V and inserting the word Sputnik in here, because Sputnik has a really interesting connotation relating to the space race, the original space race in the 60s. Sputnik being the first satellite that got launched up. Russia beat the US to the punch. They won, right? So this is a weird call out to me saying, hey, we came out with the first vaccine. We won. And the V steganography is really apparent right on the tag of it. It's almost to say, we're messing with you. We're first, but we've got more up our sleeve than we're letting on. And the V steganography is there to suggest, by the way, we know the cipher too. I don't know if that's the case or not either. This is a supposition and a conclusion I'm making as one possibility, but it's too perfect in terms of the race that the race for the pharmaceutical industry is trying to be first to create a vaccine. There isn't a consensus on that yet. Oh, Russia just sneaks one by, almost like Sputnik was just under the guise of everybody launched into space. All of a sudden, they won the race. It seems like they're poking the United States with a stick to prove their superiority. Do they even have a vaccine? I don't know. Is it a true vaccine? If they have it, maybe. I haven't looked into it enough. I only have looked into the steganography components. So, again, if anybody knows more about the Russian vaccine story, please let me know. But that's all the time I've had to look into it so far. This will be a developing story as it goes along. But to me, that's what it says. That's the one possibility I have. You have this story also coming out where Russia is its top respiratory doctor quits over gross ethics violations, because they were saying that there was going to be there was no publishing of the clinical trials. That's what it was. I did highlight it. So, no publishing of the clinical trials. There again, these gross ethics violations. It leads me to believe that maybe there is no vaccine at all, and I don't know what the ethics violations may be. Maybe this guy's from a different faction. Maybe this is a Fox faction individual that was smoked out of his den and forced to leave because of the blowback for something like this. In fact, if there is a faction in the Russian government that by creating such a story about a vaccine, whether there's a vaccine or not, creating the story about the vaccine might be the more important component. Because this is just like we're talking about with the Philosopher's Stone, with I'm gonna have to log back into my slideshow page here just a sec. As we're talking about the components of sorry, I had to get back over here, guys. Let's scroll back down. The components of the Philosopher's Stone, like we've talked about over on the Patreon videos. This all becomes a little bit more apparent, where they may or may not have an actual vaccine. They, like I said, they're probably in all rights casting a mimetic spell, kind of like Steve Jobs does, and smoking out people like this by the announcements, because it forces their hand to take action. It's like a chess game. If you take out their rook, they have to retreat, they have to make moves, counter moves, and one of those moves might be that he has to at least acknowledge this. If he doesn't acknowledge the fact that this vaccine hasn't been clinically studied, then his ethics comes into consideration anyway. So it may have been something to cause people like this to leave office, because they were rendered no other choice, even in the midst of a potentially fake vaccine. So, along with that, it also forced the Pope's hand, the head Jesuit of them all, to also comment on the fact that we shouldn't be practicing coronavirus vaccine nationalism. Everybody needs to adopt everybody else's vaccines. This is going to be a scandal of governments if we don't work together, all this kind of shit. So, sorry guys, like the Jesuits just piss me off. They sit here and they have all of this divine right stuff to say about things, and I'll leave it at that for now. The main things that I aim to point out about the Jesuits on this channel, of course, aren't my own scathing opinions about them, but more just show what's happening behind the scenes so that people can kind of come to their own conclusions. So there's the vaccine piece of the story. It's still developing, still V-steganography all over it, but the current war itself is a little bit more of an overt, apparent situation. The covert war as it relates to the flashpoints that are making it into the media. So to go along with a lot of the Space Force agenda, and we've talked plenty about the Hermetic principles being hijacked, the fascism, what V-Nous and Venus has to do with that. We're going to get into that part of the video later on here too, when we start talking about the Anatoly Fomenko stuff. But of course, the V-steganography with the reverse aspect, the Lambda being central component to the United States Space Force, that is only now been made public because of the Trump administration's unveiling of it back last year with the Stephen Quast talk at Hillsdale College. I don't know if I'm going to get to these components today. These are patches of different operations forces within the Space Force, and so I'm going to get into these guys maybe on the next video I do, because I don't know if I'm going to have enough time for that. But I want everybody to keep that cleanly in focus as you watch this video, because there's some weird stuff. There's like this even more of the Beirut blast situation that is unfolding in the Middle East and China. We're not seeing anything like this in the United States yet, but take a look at this video. I'll play it and stop talking. But 17 seconds long. First thing you want to see about this is it's 17 seconds long. Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. Bunch of different angles here. And if you guys saw what's happening here, you get like you get basically a filament, an electric filament that was forming. I don't know why the video stopped playing. My computer's having a rough time this morning, but you guys saw the filament that was basically manifesting there on a line, and whether it was a natural formation or one that was conducted from something of space, something out in space, that remains a question mark. But it's another one of these too much of a coincidence visual cues to probably discount, right? We also have pipelines exploding, roads collapsing after the floods in China. This is even as of the 7th. The Three Gorges Dam, as of now, still hasn't collapsed, but because the CCP is having to release so much water as it relates to the weather warfare happening, we're starting to see the population actually get struck and suffer the consequences of this. So keep an eye on this story as it develops too, because well, it gets down to when that dam is going to collapse, what's going to happen. So it's important to probably keep an eye on for the famine reasons that that might befall the entire world if this were to happen. The supply chain will degrade even further. So I'll link all these stories in the description so everybody can keep an eye on that story as well. But staying in China, the more interesting components, of course, that I find of the current war, rather than the overt stuff that clearly continues to come out, is the subversive things, the things that the V cipher hides, the things that the Jesuit Fox faction seem to be propagating as it relates to the history component. So if we can't see things from the correct perspective, we cannot know the truth, and will remain at everybody's throats, and the riots will continue, and all this, this control agenda of the Fox faction and Bill Gates and everybody that we talk about. But Robert Sepper, if anybody recalls, that I'm playing this game Ghost of Tsushima. I just completed it this week, and in the last video, this is kind of the central component of the theme of the samurai's true history being guarded or occluded or hidden from view because of because of what we're finding with the Fox faction's involvement in making this. And of course, the supposition that I made in that last video is that Robert Sepper had just uncovered some recent articles and done some research about the Ainu people, A-N-I-U, the Ainu people, that were not Japanese in origin, but were white. They were of white descent, of Aryan descent, blonde hair, blue eyes, and that they were the ones that actually made up the samurai class. So, further than that, we have Nate Fox being the director, of course, of the game itself. So there's your Fox faction steganography in there. We talked in the last video about the fox dens, how you're charmed or mesmerized by the fox, and and of course, finding this fox den and what this is all about. So you're charmed by the fox in this game to believe that this is the actual history of the island of Tsushima, right? And that the Mongol invasions that the game portrays took place just as they said they did, from these Chinese-looking Mongoloids. Anyway, to go along with that story, one of the things Robert Sepper is going to point out in this video I'm going to share a clip of is that ghost Lineage DNA was found in Africa. And one of the things that we've been talking about, the Caucasoids, the Caucasus Mountains, used to be called Africa. The continent that is now labeled as Africa has not always been that way. Africa, the label, used to be ascribed to the area we now call the Caucasus Mountains, where the Caucasoids come from, and where this ghost lineage DNA is supplied from certain parts of the world and transited across Asia and into Japan, even where this story all connects, and how it could be even that the samurai class of these descendants of the gods, these ghost DNA people, made it over to the island of Tsushima or Japan in general. So I don't know in particular if this is necessarily a coincidence or not. I have to look more into it, but again, the threads connect too perfectly for us to look away, in my opinion. So with all that said, I'm going to stop with the primer. I'm going to play a video on China's pyramids, specifically that Robert Sepper talks about here as he cuts away to a clip of this being explained. And then I'm going to tie it back into this whole component of history, and while this is playing out, I'll get the passages ready to go with the Anatoly Fomenko book here. But here, I will just hit play here at about 10 and a half minutes in.
Wonderful thing about DNA testing.
And talking about DNA testing itself.
Although the information has been suppressed, alternative explanations to the communist version of Chinese history has been available for some time. As early as the 17th century, a Roman Jesuit wrote about the Chinese pyramids, and in 1785, the French Orientalist Joseph de Gignes wrote an article called "An Essay in Which We Prove the Chinese Are an Egyptian Colony."
So there it is first. The Chinese is an Egyptian colony, and the Jesuit priest who is writing about this information, at least to begin with, and then has somehow been hidden behind some ciphering in plain view ever since.
Keep in mind that in this context, Egyptian does not mean the modern Islamic civilization and demographic that occupies North Africa in modern times, which is very different culturally, ethnically, and genetically from the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids in ancient times. Despite widespread Afrocentric propaganda in the United States and European academia and media, the ancient Egyptian nobility, pharaohs, and mummies are predominantly comprised of red-headed and blonde Caucasian people.
So there you go, too. So the Egyptian mummies plus these mummies that have been found scattered all across China, there is that Caucasoid, blonde hair, red hair, blue-eyed race, the Slavics. So this is one of those missing links, I think, to the story. I'll let him continue on.
As can be attested to by the mummies themselves, which not only have Caucasian facial features, such as the high nose bridge, cheekbones, and lack of prognathism, meaning how far the mouth sticks out from the face, which any real anthropologist can visually distinguish from sub-Saharan phenotypes. But the DNA also shares affinities with Aryan or Western European genetics, depending on the period. Even the oldest remains found in Egypt, which date back to pre-dynastic times, which is now in the British Museum, nicknamed Ginger because of its red hair. So it's not only China that is hiding its true history, it's also the West that is guilty of teaching falsehoods in an effort to push a cultural Marxist political agenda.
The Jesuit
That said,
agenda.
Western archaeologists who are interested in learning the truth have, to this day, rarely been permitted to investigate the sites, and some have claimed photos show shrubs and even structures that have been deliberately planted or erected to keep the secret under wraps.
And he's speaking specifically to the pyramids. As you can see, this video is all about the Chinese pyramids that are so numerous throughout China. It would destroy any sense of normalcy to the current historical agenda if they were talked about in plain view. But they are all over the friggin' place in China. They are bigger than the pyramids that you find in Egypt.
Some archaeologists suspect that there are almost certainly lost emperors, treasures, and priceless artifacts buried below the mounds that would dwarf Howard Carter's 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun. In 1974, the world got a peek of a truly extraordinary history of China when two farmers were digging just outside Xi'an and discovered the famous Terracotta Army of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. There were legends that he had been buried inside a veritable mini city with palaces, carriages, treasures, and anything else he'd need in the afterlife. Of course, 45 years later, the inner chambers have yet to be excavated.
Do you guys see he doesn't mention this, but do you guys see the the title to this article that he's referencing? Did the Greeks help sculpt China's Terracotta Warriors? New analysis in DNA evidence suggests the 8,000 life-size figures in Emperor Qin Shi Huang's necropolis owe their inspiration to the Greeks. Whether inspiration or design specifically to the Greeks from this DNA transit across Asia.
And
Maybe,
the emperor
right?
himself has not been officially found, probably because, as I've stated earlier, DNA remains found on the site came back Caucasian, and the communist regime seems unwilling to confront the possibility that the ancient Chinese legends of blue-eyed gods and nobility might be true, similar to the blue-eyed statues of the Sumerian gods and nobility.
If they were to allow that truth to come out, they would have to naturally admit, oh, our emperor ruling class were a bunch of white blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guys that came here and propagated their DNA and were the original ruling class. If this is the true narrative story of China, imagine the uproar that would cause to the CCP's agenda to admit that. It's probably incredibly crucial that they keep this under wraps. That the Jesuits are naturally involved over in this is no surprise, but it does truly, I hope, show people how many of the sides that the Jesuits play in war. They play all of them. They're the ones ruling from the shadows, and we're all here squabbling on their chessboard. Anyway, I digress.
And the many blue-eyed statues of the ancient Egyptian god kings and pharaohs. And even the blue-eyed artifacts and mummies found all the way in ancient Peru, so they prefer to delay archaeology at the site instead. Archaeologist Kristen Romy told Live Science that researchers are going to, quote, be digging there for centuries. Chinese communist authorities will not allow anyone to excavate at the site, and Xi Jinping's government says that the technology does not exist yet to properly explore the site. So, as long as the current political situation holds up, I think she might be right. Some have claimed that the Chinese have a strong veneration of culture, meaning that they simply wish to leave their royalty at peace. But I personally don't buy that argument, seeing how China has placed millions of Caucasian Uyghurs into concentration camps and is tearing down Aryan Buddhist statues.
The Uyghurs have been in the news lately, guys, because the Uyghurs are the race of people kind of like the Ainu in Japan. But the Uyghurs are the ones that have been supposedly in the concentration camps, the worker camps, the sweatshops. There you go, the sweat labor camps that China uses for manufacturing. And this is actually also in the news. I didn't have an article pulled up about this, but Donald Trump, in the current war situation with China, and I shouldn't say just Donald Trump, the United States and the current situation war with China is constantly at China for this Uyghur, I don't know how you say it, humanitarian crisis is a good way to put it. And they're starting to talk about additional sanctions with China because of the treatment of these Uyghurs. So interesting stuff all playing out. all in the political arena as it relates to the historical arena.
And rewriting the Bible to reflect a more socialist ideology. I don't believe the communist Chinese are motivated by peace. But like the radical left in the United States, they're systematically erasing and replacing history in an effort to impose a banker-financed, UN-backed, globalist, egalitarian political agenda, similar to what happened with the communist Bolshevik takeover of Russia, which has all but erased the memory of the Tartarian Empire that preceded it, or the Afrocentric communist destruction of South Africa, which is currently imposing a racially motivated genocide against the people that established agricultural civilization there over 500 years ago.
Now in
area.
So anyway, guys, as you can see, Robert Sepper takes on a lot of the suppositions that we do over here. And the video that I just shared with you is one that actually couples up the video I showed last time. It goes right into, on the second half, the samurai DNA component. I won't cover that here because we already watched it the last time. But what is playing out now, because we have all this in play, okay, is Jesuit casuistry, as a little bit of a refresher, is based on the art of war. We've talked about this ad infinitum on this channel, and the tactics are of subterfuge, and to really look at the manipulation of energy and people's affection of it. Chapter 5 is worth a read in the art of war. But casuistry, the art of war, and then also we got some Machiavellian principles at play too, from the Prince. These are in direct opposition to the ways of the samurai. The code of the samurai is one of honor. The Bushido, the Zen Buddhism, Aikido. These are all disciplines that the samurai live by. These are two great books that Thomas Cleary is a wonderful translator of these two books. The Soul of the Samurai, which are kind of anecdotes of how to live like of what living like a samurai looks like, and then the Code of the Samurai, which is that code of the Bushido itself. And it's actually one that goes back to ancient Hermetic principles. And so if you have two sects that are, one is honorable, one is the samurai, and one governs by the shadows, you have two opposing views of what the truth is or could be. And once I got done through this game with the fox mesmerism components all over this, remember the whole thing about finding the fox den and paying homage to these Inari shrines to honor the shrine of the fox. You get a charm every time you do this. A charm, like you would store in your charm bracelet. But in this case, being mesmerized, like Bill Gates was referencing earlier. All of these components lead you to see, this game made clearly by whoever in the Fox faction, as kind of denoted by Nate Fox's involvement as the director. We're arguing, actually, that, all throughout the game, being of the shadows and being an assassin and being a rogue, these are all things that are actually virtuous. This is kind of how the whole Assassin's Creed series plays out. This is the Islamic sect, and they demonize the Templars all throughout the game, when actually the Templars are the ones that originally went against the Vatican and created the Rosicrucian and Freemasonry societies that are also bastardized for probably no reason. Not no reason, but who knows what happens in those secret societies these days. But at least the founding principles is all we can speak to being sound. Anyway, Templars originally against the Fox faction. And so it's clear to see that even like the Assassin's Creed games, along with games like this that glorify assassination, are the virtuous thing to do, the only way to win a war. It's the only way. Spying is the only way. Whereas with the Code of the Samurai, being honorable and facing your opponent head on and not stabbing them in the back, it's the opposite viewpoint. And to sleuth into the shadows and do this subterfuge, and to take part in this subterfuge, is to go against God, to represent the V instead of the lambda, right? And we've talked about this so many times. The lambda versus the V. The lambda versus the lambda is the upright aspect of the pentagram, and the V is the backwards aspect of the pentagram. And the chakra system and everything that it supplies credence for. So what we're saying is that in the Ghost of Tsushima, by playing this game, you become charmed by the Fox faction. And you become docile to the ways of spying and subterfuge. And you come to resonate with those rather than by way of honor. The fact that it came out on the 17th of July is suspect too as it relates to the Q faction. Again, Q is the 17th letter of the alphabet. Don't know if that ultimately plays in, but it's interesting, right? So, again, the game is all about the 1274 Mongolian invasion led by Khotun Khan, which landed on the Japanese island of Tsushima. And I want to show you something of what happens here when there's a point in the game where Jyn, the character you play as, sacrifices his morals and his code, his samurai code, to his uncle, who is a samurai, in the name of, we didn't do it the right way. We didn't win this battle, he says, because we didn't submit to the ways of the shadows. And his uncle, Ever the Samurai, is somebody who ascribes to that honor code to the, I don't know what I'm trying to say is he lives by this code in a way that he would die by this code, which is what the samurai, of course, would dictate him do. But Jyn falls, and here's the scene where this happens in the game.
There is another way. We will discuss it alone.
He's talking about spying and assassination being the way that they win to break into this castle here.
The Mongols are on the defensive. We will strike before they regroup and end this war tomorrow.
You sent our men to die.
They are soldiers.
Their blood is on our hands. I can find a way past the bridge. Poison the enemy.
An act of terror.
I am trying to save our people.
By teaching them to fear us. If you continue down this path, you will be no better than the Mongols. I trained you to fight with honor.
Honor died on the beach. The Khan deserves to suffer.
You are ruled by your emotion.
I sacrificed everything I knew to save our people. I gave them hope. You did nothing. No. We're finished.
Patching the bridge.
So that's kind of the whole scene where Jyn, the main character, falls into this role as the ghost, right? And again, if you can imagine, instead of these guys being Japanese in ethnicity, instead Slavic, because what it appears is the samurai were indeed Slavic, as we're going to get into right here, in Anatoly Fomenko's work, then you kind of have the whole picture here. The whole thing being said is that going against the honor code of the samurai is the only way to survive. And what Jin's uncle is saying about that is surviving isn't living. Honor is the only way. And again, I'm going to point everybody to Walter Veith and the Sun Tzu Jesuit Art of War speech that he gives. I'm going to link this in the description. We're not going to get it. This is a very contextually deep lecture that he gives, but Walter Veith talks specifically about a lot of this stuff and the tactics being used for the art of war. But what we're going to do is we're going to find out a little bit more about this story of the Mongols, because again, a little bit of a primer. Anatoly Fomenko is somebody who's taken the context and the chronology of history in general, especially as it relates to the greater Asia landmass, Russia, China, Japan's part of it, and piecing together really what European history has done to influence even the East. And history, because of Jesuit casuistry, is not what it seems. So Mongolia is also not an area that was occupied by Chinese Asian descendant people. Again, we've talked about this before. The red hair, blue-eyed Slavic people, they were large in stature, were the ones that made up the Mongolian horde army. So even really early on in chronology book 5 of Anatoly Fomenko's series, he's talking about the descendants of the Mongols. And in his research for truth toward Tartary and the empire that was, and the one that is being hidden in plain sight, in section 2, he writes, he titles the meaning of the word Mongolia as used by the authors of this book. So we're going to establish what Mongolia is, and then get into a little bit of the context around what's happening even in the Ghosts of Tsushima game and the Fox faction's hiding of this. So in the present book, book 5, Anatoly says, we often use the words Mongolia and Mongols, inevitably confusing the readers, despite our intention. The problem is that these words are already used in an altogether different meaning, referring to a certain racial type known as a Mongoloid. And of course, everybody pictures these people as Asian descent. However, our research demonstrates that the medieval meaning of the word had differed from the modern completely. Mongolia, or Tartar Mongolia, Tartary, was the name of the medieval Russian Empire, which we also called Horde Russia. And if we're going back to Blizzard Entertainment, this is part of this is not something that I included earlier in the video, but part of Tencent, right? And we were talking about in the Washington Post article how they are also involved with Blizzard. Blizzard famously with the World of Warcraft series, the evil faction is the Horde. The orcs are part of the Horde. So this connotation with the word the Horde is all over. Describing the warmongering Mongols, right? So, part of this horde, it is similar to the terms Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and Russian Federation, that is Tartary Mongols, in the sense that the populace has always been multinational. The Slavs have always coexisted with other ethnic groups and nomadically wandered. As frequently mentioned above, the word Mongolia translates from Greek as the Great Empire or the Great Kingdom. Alternatively, it may be derived from Russian words for many, might, multitude, mosh, etc., respectively. One must constantly bear in mind that a great many terms have changed their meanings over the years, just like we're talking about with the labels of Africa and such, especially as it relates to Africa. We couldn't think of another word to replace the term Mongols, which translates as the Great Ones, although it may have been expedient so as not to confuse the readers, who are naturally accustomed to the modern meaning of the word Mongol. We must therefore urge the readers to keep this in mind all the time, use the words Mongol and Mongolian in their medieval meaning exclusively, referring to the great empire of the Middle Ages of Russia, called Tartary, founded by the Russians, as well as numerous other ethnic groups that populated its territory. So similar to what we have to, if we're talking about the period of time back then, we have to call them Tartary instead of Mongol. The two terms are intertwined with each other, meaning the Mongols are white guys, red hair, blue eyes. Similar to, if we're talking about the Caucasus Mountains, relating to the same period of time, we have to call that Africa. It becomes very confusing. This is what casuistry is. The Jesuits' learning against learning program. It conflates everything, so it's hard to get to the bottom of. From the one hand, we are referring to the same phenomena as modern historians, the great Mongolian Empire with its center in Russia as the Golden Horde on the Volga. We agree that it had really existed, however, unlike historians' versions of it in the Roman schools. We suggest that great equals Mongolian was in fact Russian built by the Slavs and the Turkic peoples, the Russians and the Tartars. So this is also the Turkish people being involved relates back to the Caucasus Mountains. So Chapter 7, so quite some time passes in the book, and we get to chapter 7, and it says the Mongolian conquest of Japan, which is what's covered in the Ghost of Tsushima story, right? This Mongolian conquest, invasions of Japan. So the military caste of the Japanese samurai as the descendants of the conquerors of Japan originating from the Horde. So this is going to go into the whole lineage of those Ainu people that we talked about, and why this is hidden in plain sight, like Robert Sepper is talking through in his videos. So this is page 143, chapter 7 of book 5. And in the section, he states, above, we have cited certain data to support the idea that Japan was also conquered by Russia or the Horde during the epoch of the Great Mongolian Conquest. And if this is the case, and that great samurai class was established as the shogunate there, we can now see why the Ainu people were in fact white, and maybe were descendant of these original Mongoloids, right? The military reign of the samurai, or the Sumerians, Sumeria, samurai, Sumerians, Ainu, Anu, Anunnaki, Ainu. These people are the same. They're the DNA descendant of the Hebrew context that we read in the Bible. These people that from heaven to earth came, is what held Anunnaki. The definition of the word plays out in terms of its etymological meaning. And so the samurai, the Sumerians, Sumerai, Sumerian, this becomes just wordplay to kind of uncover, like, oh, over time, the language and culture kind of conflated the sounds a little bit, but the vowels were all the same. All the consonants, or excuse me, the vowels were the only things that changed. The consonants that make up the core of the word all remain the same. So, samurai, Sumerians, is most likely to identify as the reign of the Horde established on the Japanese Isles after their conquest. In particular, as we have pointed out above, many representatives of the Horde from Muscovite Tartary and the American Northeast relocated here after the defeat of Pugachev in the second half of the 18th century. So we're talking about the 1700s. People are actually moving over here because of their roots being established in Japan, like white people. Are there any traces of the great Mongolian conquest of Japan in existence? There are indeed. Let us turn to the old maps of Japan, for instance, the one from the famous Atlas of John Blau, presumably published in 1655. 7.1 and 7.2 figures. So he shows these maps, and then he talks about it here. He says, apart from these, we see an island called Kosikwe. The word is possibly derived from the word Cossack. Nowadays, the island in question is called Kyushu. The name Kos must be slightly distorted version of Guz, which is a name that used to stand for Cossack. So Guz used to be a synonymous term for Cossack. We also see the name Vulgo on a bigger island nearby, a possible derivative of Volga or Vlaga, the Russian for wet or water. So, in other words, you're seeing on these maps, here's a close-up of the regions. They have very Russian names, is what Anatoly is pointing out. These names aren't Japanese in nature. They are Slavic names in nature. Just like how over in the United States here, we have all of these Greek names we have Colombian and Greek naming conventions for cities and street names and things like this. Nearby, we see the legend of Kikoko in large letters. We instantly recollect the old name of Scotland, or Scotia. Again, part of this red-haired legend, right? Both names might be derived from the Russian words for gallop and ride, which is skok and skakat, more Russian terminology. It could have been used for referring to horsemen or the Cossacks. The name of the famous Japanese city of Osaka might also be a derivative of the word Cossack. Makes sense, right? One of the largest islands in Japan is still called Shikoku. The name of another famous Japanese city, Kyoto, the old capital of Japan, is virtually identical with the names Katia, Katai, and Scythia. The Scythians. The people who are the Phoenicians, who came here and settled in the Grand Canyon area. I hope this whole story is starting to make sense, that this race of the gods, after the Atlantis event, whatever the heck happened then, kind of spread itself all over the place and was forced to propagate their DNA with the other races. Who, you know, it seems to me the whole slavery and Slavic story is starting to come together very nicely. So anyway, what we have here is more corroboration to our suppositions and conclusions we're drawing from last time. Now, as we go through and find more V steganography as it relates to these components, we'll of course be able to move further along. I really want to point people toward this too. The Fox Mulder character is something we're going to get into as part of this Fox faction steganography in the X-File series. Again, we don't cover the X steganography stuff here as much, but in the coming episodes, I'm going to do some stuff around the Z, as in Z, steganography, plus the X-File stuff, because I don't see Daniel List over at The Dark Journalist, though he is the X steganography whiz. He doesn't look as much into the X-Files as I think he could, to look at the X-Files through the lens of the V steganography, in fact. So a little bit of a teaser, but it is something that, in addition to the next step we're going to take with this Fox steganography stuff, of course, the X-Files is also on the Fox network. We will continue to break that story apart. For now, the space tech is where we're going to end this video, and I'm going to just show you guys some of the newest announcements, the latest announcements that I've seen come out relating to this technology, and we're going to wrap it up, and then I'll call it good until I see you guys on the Patreon side of things for part 2 of this video, where we talk about more about the Bitcoin reset and of course close out the whole alchemy story around the Tesla Boring Company, CERN riddle, and such. So interestingly enough, Lockheed Martin, somebody who I've pointed out in the past, their logo has V steganography, lambda and V steganography. It's 2 lambdas making up what's clearly a relief of a pentagram. They are curiously tying together the story of where we're seeing these the explosions happen in China. If you guys remember that arc filament that manifested over the city there in China, where several cameras caught. Interesting timing on this directed energy weapon technology that Lockheed has. Also interesting timing that they're talking about this in relation to some of the fires that are happening in California right now again, which in the years prior, people have also indicated these are likely from directed energy weapons. But nobody could ever, directed energy weapons aren't a thing. They aren't a thing. And now all of a sudden we have the military establishment coming straight out with the fact that they have this technology and they can show visual 3D graphic representation of how it's used. So this new directed energy tech, this is a July 2020 video.
Lockheed Martin produces systems that do everything from detect the threats to identify the threats, determine whether it's a threat to the aircraft, and then employs the appropriate weapon, in this case, a laser weapon system.
What we're hearing from our customers is that they need a layered, multi-domain defensive approach that can be integrated across platforms to neutralize these threats across all those domains.
So neutralize threats across, he was very non-specific about, all of these threats. We have so many threats from all these different domains. We need defensive capabilities for all of them. What are all these domains? And he doesn't mention space outwardly, but we can read between the lines, of course, and guess that's exactly what they're talking about. They're a military contractor.
Imagine an aircraft equipped with a laser system with the capability to be able to neutralize a threat at the speed of a lightning strike, the precision of a surgical scalpel, with the magazine to deal with a swarm, and with the scalable effect to be able to address that threat, providing an effect all the way the one end from simply deterring it for a short period of time, all the way up to completely neutralizing and defeating that threat.
So unpack what he just said there. He said, imagine an airborne vessel. Like, this could be anything. This could be a satellite to orbitally target something and disable it, destroy it, render it a move. Yeah, so he's talking about all the things that the space tech is capable of doing, not being specific in his language about it, but because Lockheed is showing a visual of an aircraft, the viewer might assume, oh, he's talking about aircrafts. Nowhere in his speech did he say anything except for airborne. Airborne. He didn't talk about the specific crafts or delivery mechanisms that were being used to implement this technology. The viewer is mesmerized by the visual. If you were to listen to this in audio format and just close your eyes and listen to it again, rewind the video and listen to that again and insert a visual of anything in space, anything in orbital tech, and that direct statement applies as a blanket to anything you might be able to imagine. Kind of crazy, but that's what he's saying.
We were able to integrate our laser weapon system, Athena, into the classified C2 network and receive cues from the radar on the range in order.
And what is the C2 network? The classified C2 network. She says, oh yeah, we can tap right into this classified C2 network. What the hell is that? They're talking about these capabilities, but they're being non-specific about how they're using them. They're just telling you what they're capable of in this whole video. And so it's really, again, it's kind of a non-starter. It's this big puff piece that they're doing, like, oh, we're transparent, we're Lockheed Martin, you know.
In order to execute the full kill chain.
The Helios laser weapon system builds on 40 years of combat system engineering and radar excellence. That is a fundamental change for laser weapon systems, which here to date have been prototypes added to a ship. Helios will be integrated into the ship.
So Helios will be integrated into the ship. And again, Helios is the name of this. The name Helios has a tendency to be something more of a cosmic nature, right? So the Helios, think of Helios as it relates to the sun, to the heliosphere. One might indicate this is a code word for, again, orbital technology. It's very apparent to me what the language is. You can watch the rest of this video. It's just more and more of these guys that work for Lockheed that are saying generalized things about technology that they've crafted that lends a lot more questions to be answered than the visuals that they're purporting. So interesting that it also came out July 22nd. Of course, 722 is written 22-7 as the date in most of the world, and that's a division problem. 22 divided by 7 is pi, 3.14. It's the best approximation in terms of a rational number equation that you can reach to reach the calculation of pi. So by releasing it here, the backwards of the calculation, 722, reverse, 22 divided by 7 equaling pi, you get another call out to the Pythagorean math that makes up, of course, not this particular shape, but circumference math still the same. We're just I only pulled this back up because this is also a Pythagorean geometric glyph, whatever you want to call it. But more stuff coming out. In the space realm, we mentioned Virgin Galactic unveiling last time, but then there's this other stuff. This I don't know what to think of. This prosthetic, impressive, all-terrain bionic suit that you can trounce around the desert in. It just reminded me of the movie Wild Wild West. Is all it did. If you guys remember, there's this big. If you even see on the movie poster. I didn't even enlarge it, but there's this big spider mech in this terrible movie that came out in 1999, right around the same time Will Smith was doing all the Men in Black stuff. It was like this, right in that same year he was doing, if anybody was a kid of the 90s, they remember like all of the MTV music videos that Will Smith was doing around this time. And it just speaks credence to something else going on here in the Wild Wild West, I think. What is it? Maybe it's something to the effect that around the Civil War period of time, our technology was much more advanced than anybody gives it credit for. There were airships and such being built, and I think on first glance, because I will look more into this, I don't have a conclusion I'm drawing yet, but my suspicion is that it's pointing to the fact that during the Sonoran Aeronautic Club days of the 1850s and 1860s, around the Civil War period, we had a better understanding of etheric technology rather than this steampunk cybernetic version that we're being fed these days. But more to come on that in terms of the Wild Wild West stuff. Hermeus in the Mach 5 engine we talked about last time also, I think, relates to this whole story with Goodyear, because in some way, of course, the Hermes boot is depicted with Goodyear's logo and the fascism that plays out in plain sight with all of these types of memes. I do think that there's something in play as it relates to this whole social justice warrior movement and stuff that Goodyear is now entrenched in. Potentially, the thing that I was looking at here in this is that, okay, they're talking about what not to say. You can't say all lives matter. You have to say Black Lives Matter. What is this? Maybe the wheels are coming off the old system. Goodyear is related to wheels. They're related to the blimp. They're full of hot air. So maybe Goodyear has been full of hot air all along, ever since the blimp crashed, ever since the Hindenburg event. Our whole airship paradigm came apart, and we went, rather than developing airships, we went on the ground, onto tires instead, no anti-gravity. So to me, that's kind of what this is speaking to. This whole story around Goodyear being kind of being lambasted and criticized in the news maybe speaks to, again, the Nikola Tesla paradigm coming about, the hermetic control that the V faction has over us going away, and rather releasing the true space technology, right? That's just my view of things for now. But that's kind of about all I had in terms of the this side of the video. We're gonna start the next video off with some astrology. So in part 2, you guys can expect me to finish out the whole arc of the Full Metal Alchemist series. We're gonna watch the final conclusions I'm drawing from the Full Metal Alchemist tie-ins to the Philosopher's Stone. We're going to talk about the astrological alignments with Venus as they relate to the times that we're going through right now. We're going to get a little bit further into the history mystery with Anatoly Fomenko's research, even as it relates to these astrological alignments. And we're going to discuss something that's no secret, or something everybody's familiar with, that's seen the Patreon videos, and Wetico and the Lost Star of Myth and Time, where we stand in the order of the end times that the Bible talks about. So that's the way we're going to start off. We're going to go into the alchemy stuff, like I said, and we're also going to talk about the Twitter hack of the V faction's Twitter accounts, which Bitcoin was related with, and the further collapse and transition of the economy. For everybody not aware, I'm going to be transitioning over a lot of my streaming to Theta. We're going to be doing live decodes over there pretty soon. There are going to be specific rewards that I give to my patrons. So if you want to become a member before I start doing that, I'm going to be doing a YouTube video in the coming days, probably before I do one of these reports. In fact, another report, but I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of what Theta is, why it's way better than YouTube, why it can't be censored, what we're going to be doing for interaction over there. So I will be posting that to YouTube, but I will be adding so much more engagement for the patrons over on that streaming service once it gets going. I'm not going to neglect the YouTube folks either. I'm still going to be making V-steganography videos over here, but we're just going to go much deeper on the other end because we're not censored. So everyone, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll start off again with the Venus transit astrology stuff, and finish out the alchemy series, and I will see you guys next time after I move. Sometime after Labor Day, I'll be doing these a lot more frequently. So love you all. Stay safe out there. And let me know in the comments if you want to see anything expanded upon. If a lot of this stuff starts to make sense to you and you want to see other topics, I will always take suggestions. So anyway, thanks guys. Talk to you soon.